The chamber did not echo. It absorbed sound. That was the first thing Dr. Elias Varn noticed as he stepped into the assembly hall of the Interstellar Accord. Not the towering delegates, not the impossible architecture, not even the cold white star burning at the center of the holographic chamber. It was the silence. A silence so complete it felt intentional, like a place designed for decisions that could not be undone. Above the chamber floor, suspended in perfect geometric alignment, a lattice of light unfolded, thousands of data streams weaving together into a single projection. A list. Not just any list. A verdict. Elias stopped walking. His identification sigil flickered once above his wrist, marking him as an observer. Not a delegate. Not a voter. Not someone who mattered. Just present. Proceed, a voice said. It did not come from a mouth. It came from everywhere. The light shifted. The list resolved. Designated systems, non-viable. Classification, terminal lethality. Action, protocol omega. A faint murmur rippled through the chamber, not emotional, not shocked. Analytical. Confirming. As if every being present had already expected this outcome. Elias felt his throat tighten. Protocol omega. He had read about it exactly once during his induction briefing, buried between diplomatic procedures and translation matrices. It was not a protocol. It was an erasure. A system placed under Omega was sealed. No travel. No signals. No contact. Forever. The kind of decision civilizations made when they wanted something forgotten. The projection shifted again. 10 points of light appeared, scattered across a rotating star map. Each one pulsing faintly. Each one marked. Condemned. These systems, the omnipresent voice continued, have been evaluated under concordance lethality metrics. The words were precise. Measured. Final. Each represents an environment fundamentally incompatible with sustained organic survival. The first point expanded. A world formed in the air, a dark sphere wrapped in crushing shadow. Numbers began to cascade beside it. Pressure indices. Thermal readings. Chemical composition. All of it climbing. All of it wrong. Surface pressure exceeding 1,000 standard atmospheres, the voice stated. The image zoomed. A probe descended into the blackness. For a moment, nothing. The hull bent. Metal screamed without sound. And in an instant, the probe collapsed inward, vanishing into itself. Gone. Elias exhaled slowly. Around him, no one reacted. No surprise. No hesitation. Just data being confirmed. Biological traces detected prior to structural failure, the voice added. The projection flickered. A shape appeared. Not quite a creature. Not quite anything familiar. Movement. Hunger. Then it vanished. The next world replaced it instantly. A burning landscape. Atmosphere thick with corrosive vapor. Temperatures beyond material tolerance. The probe lasted longer this time. 83 seconds. Then it dissolved. Another. A frozen wasteland where even molecular motion seemed reluctant to exist. Another. A storm system so violent the atmosphere itself appeared to tear apart. Each one worse. Each one undeniable. Each one final. Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not fear. Not yet. Something else. Recognition. A flicker of familiarity he couldn't quite place. The voice continued, uninterrupted. Cumulative analysis confirms a 100% lethality threshold across all surveyed systems. The 10 points of light pulse together now. In sync. Like a heartbeat. Or a countdown. Recommendation. Immediate enforcement of Protocol Omega. The chamber darkened slightly. Not physically. Perceptually. As if the decision itself carried weight. Elias glanced around him. Towering figures of glass and light. Dense, stone-like entities that seemed carved from gravity itself. Forms that existed more as energy patterns than matter. All of them still. All of them certain. No debate. No discussion. Just acceptance. Because the data was absolute. It always was. A soft chime resonated through the chamber. Precise. Unavoidable. Voting sequence initiated. The word struck harder than anything that came before. Because this was the moment. Not analysis. Not theory. Action. Once the vote completed, there would be no reversal. No appeal. No second look. Elias looked back at the projection. At the 10 marked systems. At the silent, pulsing lights. And suddenly, that flicker in his mind sharpened. Pressure exceeding 1,000 atmospheres. Extreme thermal zones. Toxic atmospheres. Violent storms. Frozen deserts. He had seen these before. Not in reports. Not in simulations. In textbooks. In field studies. His breath caught. That wasn't possible. The chimes sounded again. Final confirmation window, 30 seconds. The countdown appeared. Cold. Unfeeling. Unstoppable. 29. 20. Elias didn't move. Couldn't. Because a single impossible thought had just formed. And once seen, it could not be unseen. The lights pulsed. The chamber waited. And somewhere, buried beneath layers of perfect logic, something was very, very wrong. 27. 26. 25. The countdown did not rush. It didn't need to. It moved with the quiet confidence of something that had never been wrong. Elias forced himself to breathe. Slow. Controlled. That was what he was here for. Not diplomacy. Not politics. Observation. Analysis. Understanding systems. That's what they had told him when they pulled him out of a remote geological survey station on the outer colonies and placed him here, in the most powerful decision-making body in known space. You have a contextual mind, they had said. At the time, it had sounded like a compliment. Now it felt like a responsibility he hadn't agreed to carry. 24. 23. The projection shifted slightly as additional data layers unfolded. Not new information. Just deeper resolution. More precision. As if the system was reassuring itself. Elias stepped forward. A small movement. Insignificant compared to the massive entities surrounding him. But in the silence of the chamber, it felt louder than it should have. No one stopped him. No one acknowledged him. Why would they? He wasn't part of this. Not really. His designation hovered faintly at the edge of the projection. Observer class, provisional species entry. A polite way of saying, irrelevant. 21. 20. His eyes moved across the data. Pressure readings. Thermal gradients. Atmospheric toxicity curves. Each one clean. Each one precise. Each one correct. That was the problem. They were too correct. Isolated. Perfectly measured. Completely devoid of context. Elias frowned. His mind moved automatically now, pulling from years of fieldwork, scattered memories, half-forgotten lectures, nights spent cataloging data no one else cared about. Pressure exceeding 1,000 atmospheres. His fingers twitched slightly. That number again. He knew it. Not vaguely. Exactly. A place where metal failed. Where light died. Where nothing should survive. Except it did. He swallowed. The second world rotated into focus again, the one with the corrosive atmosphere. 400 degrees. Sulfuric aerosols. Geothermal instability. The probe's failure had been expected. Logical. Inevitable. And yet, Elias's mind betrayed him. Because he could smell it. Not literally. Memory. Acrid. Burning the back of the throat. He had stood in a place like that once. Protective suit hissing. Sensors screaming warnings. Still, life had been there. Not abundant. Not comfortable. But present. Persistent. Adapting. 16. His gaze snapped to the third data set. Cryogenic conditions. Near molecular stagnation. A world where motion itself was a luxury. Impossible. Uninhabitable. That same fracture in certainty. A memory of endless white. Wind carving patterns into frozen nothingness. And beneath it, something alive. Hidden. Waiting. Surviving. Elias's heartbeat quickened. Not from fear. From recognition. 15. He looked around the chamber. At the towering delegates. At the silent observers. At the beings who had catalogued thousands of worlds, mapped entire galaxies, reduced chaos into clean, perfect equations. They weren't wrong. That was the terrifying part. Every single data point was accurate. Every conclusion was logical. Every outcome was consistent. And yet, the conclusion itself felt wrong. Because they were doing something subtle. Something easy to miss. They were taking the most extreme data point and calling it the whole. Elias's jaw tightened. That wasn't how real systems worked. Not planets. Not ecosystems. Not anything complex. Extremes existed. Of course they did. But they were never the full picture. They were edges. Boundaries. Fragments. He stepped closer to the projection now. Close enough that the light refracted across his face. Close enough to see the transitions between data layers. And there it was. The thing that made his stomach drop. Coordinates. Tiny. Almost irrelevant. Attached to each data set. He focused. Ran the numbers. Cross-referenced distances in his head. Latitude. Longitude. Relative positioning. And suddenly, everything aligned. Not 10 worlds. 10 locations. His breath caught. 11. No, that couldn't be right. He checked again. Faster now. Running mental calculations, mapping vectors, comparing environmental signatures. Pressure zone. Thermal zone. Biological saturation. Cryogenic field. Atmospheric instability. They weren't scattered randomly. They formed a pattern. A single pattern. One he had seen before. A planetary distribution. Elias felt the ground beneath him shift, not physically, but in understanding. Because if he was right, if this pattern meant what he thought it meant, then this wasn't just a misclassification. This was something far worse. He looked back at the projection. At the 10 pulsing points of light. At the systems marked for permanent isolation. And for the first time since entering the chamber, he felt fear. Not for himself. For what was about to happen. 7. Because if he stayed silent, if he let the countdown reach 0, they wouldn't just be sealing off 10 dead worlds. They would be erasing something alive. Something complex. Something they fundamentally did not understand. His hands curled into fists. The chamber remained still. Unquestioning. Certain. Elias took a step forward. And this time, the system noticed. A subtle shift in the projection. A recalibration. A recognition of movement where none was expected. For the first time, the room acknowledged him. The silence deepened. And right at the edge of the final moment, Elias Varn opened his mouth. The word came out before he could reconsider it. Wait. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In a chamber built on absolute certainty, interruption itself was an anomaly. The countdown vanished. Not paused. Terminated. Every stream of data froze mid-flow. Every projection held in perfect stillness. And then, the chamber responded. Observer Varn, the voice said. Not curious. Not annoyed. Just acknowledging. You have interrupted a confirmed decision sequence. Elias swallowed, suddenly aware of every eye, every sensor, every field of perception, locked onto him. There was no hostility, which somehow made it worse. You may present a relevance justification. Not an invitation. A requirement. Elias forced his voice to stay steady. I need clarification on the first data set. The pause. Not hesitation. Processing. Clarification is unnecessary, the voice replied. The data is complete. I'm not questioning the data, Elias said quickly. That part had to be clear. If he attacked the data, he would lose instantly. I'm questioning the interpretation. A ripple moved through the chamber. But real. For the first time, something had disrupted the perfect alignment of agreement. The projection shifted. The first world expanded again, swallowing the chamber in darkness. Pressure values climbed along the edges of the display. 1,042 atmospheres. 1,089. 1,103. The numbers stabilized. Final. Absolute. This environment, the voice stated, exceeds structural tolerance of all known organic supporting systems. The image descended again, faster this time, deliberate, as if the system was making a point. The probe entered the blackness. No light, no reference, only pressure. The hull groaned, subtle at first, then sharper, metal bending under force that could not be resisted. Elias watched, forcing himself not to look away. Because this was real. This part was true. The seams along the probe's exterior began to warp. Microscopic fractures spread like veins. Collapse. Instant. Total. The probe didn't break. It imploded. Crushed inward with such force it ceased to exist as a structure. Gone in less than a second. Silence followed. The kind that confirmed expectation. The kind that said, "This is why we are right." Structural failure occurred within predicted tolerance thresholds. The voice continued. Conclusion: environment is non-viable. Elias exhaled slowly. "Show the final biological scan," he said. Another pause. Shorter this time. The data complied. For a fraction of a second, just before the probe's destruction, something moved. A flicker. A distortion in the black. Then it resolved. A shape. Thin. Wrong. Its body wasn't built to resist pressure. It was built from it. Flesh compressed into something denser than muscle should allow. Eyes reduced to useless remnants. Not a mouth. A mechanism. Rows of curved, interlocking teeth designed not to bite, but to trap. And in front of it, a small, pulsing light. So inviting. Deadly. The creature drifted through the crushing dark as if it belonged there. As if the pressure that destroyed machines was nothing to it. The image froze. Magnified. Analyzed. Biological anomaly detected, the voice stated. Classification: hyperadaptive predatory organism. The creature's jaw opened. Too wide. Far too wide. Then the image cut. Gone. Replaced instantly by clean data. Press. Numbers. Control restored. Presence of extremophile life does not alter viability classification, the voice continued. Survival of isolated organisms does not equate to systemic sustainability. There was. The logic. Perfect. Unbreakable. And on its own. Completely correct. Elias nodded slowly. Agreed. That word hit the chamber harder than disagreement would have. Because it aligned him with the system. For a moment. I agree, he repeated. This environment is lethal. No reaction. Because that was already established. But Elias didn't stop. It is also real. A shift. Subtle. Curious. Because that statement carried weight it shouldn't have. The projection zoomed out slightly. The blackness of the world still dominating the space. Clarify, the voice said. Elias stepped closer. Closer to the crushing dark. Closer to the thing that shouldn't exist. You're measuring the environment correctly, he said. Pressure. Temperature. Structural limits. He gestured toward the frozen image of the collapsed probe. And based on that, you're concluding survival is impossible. Yes. Except it isn't. The words hung there. Heavy. Not loud. But undeniable. Elias pointed at the creature. It's not just surviving, he said quietly. It's evolved for this. Another ripple moved through the chamber. Stronger this time. Not disagreement. Not yet. But something new. Tension. Because now, this wasn't just data confirmation. This was contradiction. The voice responded immediately. Isolated biological adaptation does not redefine environmental classification. Elias nodded again. Still calm. Still controlled. On its own? No. He took a breath. And chose his next words carefully. But this isn't the only environment like this, is it? Silence. Not empty. Focused. The kind of silence that precedes something shifting. Elias looked back at the projection. At the darkness. At the impossible creature. At the other 9 points of light still waiting. I think, he said slowly, you should show the next one. The chamber didn't move. Didn't react. But the system. The system listened. A fraction of a second later, the darkness vanished, replaced by fire. The darkness didn't fade. It was erased, replaced instantly by light so harsh it felt violent. The chamber filled with a burning landscape, cracked earth glowing from beneath, the air itself trembling under waves of heat distortion. Color lost meaning here. Everything was shades of yellow, orange, and something deeper, something molten. The data surged into place. Surface temperature, 417 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric composition, sulfuric aerosols, hydrochloric traces. Pressure variability, extreme. Second designation, the voice stated, seamless, unaffected by the interruption. A thermochemical environment exceeding organic tolerance limits. The probe descended. Unlike before, it didn't fall into darkness. It fought the air. Heat shimmered across its hull, bending light, distorting its shape. For a moment, it held. Then the surface came into view. Boiling. Not metaphorically. Literally. Pools of thick, bubbling liquid erupted in slow, violent bursts, releasing plumes of yellow gas that coiled upward like living things. The probe angled slightly, stabilizing. Its sensors flared, data streams spiking across the projection. Elias watched carefully. This part mattered. Because again, the system wasn't wrong. External integrity holding, the voice reported. 80 seconds. That was how long it had lasted before. Elias counted silently. 10, 20, 30. The hull began to discolor. 40, 50. Surface layers started to peel. 60, 70. A fissure in the ground split open beneath the probe. A violent burst of pressurized gas erupted upward, engulfing it completely. The feed fractured. Signal distortion. Thermal overload. And then, failure. The probe didn't implode this time. It dissolved. Its structure breaking apart under chemical assault, eaten away faster than it could compensate. The image collapsed into static. Gone. Operational duration, 87 seconds. The voice confirmed. Conclusion, environment is non-viable. Precise. Final. Elias didn't argue. Not yet. Show full atmospheric analysis, he said instead. The system complied immediately. Layer upon layer of chemical breakdown filled the projection. Toxicity curves. Corrosion models. Everything pointing to the same conclusion. Impossible. And yet, Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. Because beneath the chaos, there was structure. Patterns in the chemical distribution. Localized concentrations. Not uniform. Not global. He didn't say it. Not yet. Instead, he gestured slightly. The next one. No hesitation. The system responded. The heat vanished. Replaced by green. Not calm. Not peaceful. Alive. Too alive. The chamber filled with dense, suffocating vegetation, layer upon layer of growth choking out light itself. Movement everywhere. Not large. Not obvious. But constant. Unseen things shifting beneath leaves. Vines tightening. Spores drifting through thick, humid air. The data flared. Biological density, extreme. Airborne agents, unknown/hostile. Microbial saturation, critical. A hyperbiotic ecosystem, the voice stated. Unregulated biological aggression at all levels. The probe entered the canopy. First, nothing. Just sound. A constant, layered hum of life. Something struck the probe from below. Insignificant. Then another. And another. The feed zoomed. Thousands. Millions. Swarming. Covering the surface. Their bodies small, but their numbers overwhelming. The probe's outer systems triggered defensive protocols. Too late. Something darker spread beneath them. Not movement. Growth. A black, creeping layer that consumed whatever it touched. Organic decomposition at impossible speed. The hull sensor screamed. Integrity dropping. Not from force. From being eaten. The image shook violently as the probe attempted ascent. It never made it. Signal loss. Then silence. Conclusion, systemic biological hostility, the voice said. Environment classified as terminally lethal. Elias exhaled slowly. Three completely different environments. Crushing pressure, corrosive heat, predatory biology. Each one, individually undeniable. Collectively, something else. The fourth, Elias said quietly. There was the slightest delay. Not refusal. Not resistance. A fraction of a second longer than before. Endless white. The chamber temperature didn't change. But it felt like it did. The image was a frozen expanse stretching beyond visibility. Flat, still, empty. The data appeared. Surface temperature, -89 degrees Celsius. Wind velocity, sustained structural stress levels. Thermal activity, negligible. A cryogenic desert, the voice said. Energy absence at levels incompatible with biological processes. The probe landed. No resistance. No impact. Stillness. For a moment, nothing happened. No movement. No attack. No visible threat. And that was the worst part. Because this was death by absence. The probe remained operational longer than the others. 1 minute. 2, 3. Systems began to fail. Not from damage. From stillness. Batteries drained faster than predicted. Internal heat dissipated into the void. Mechanical components slowed. Then stopped. Frozen. Locked in place. The signal faded. Not violently. Quietly. Like something slipping out of existence. Conclusion, non-viable environment. The voice finalized. For worlds. For deaths. For absolute truths. The projection pulled back. All 10 points of light pulsed again. Stronger now. Synchronized. Reinforcing the conclusion. Elias stood still. His mind racing beneath a calm exterior. Because now, the pattern wasn't subtle anymore. It was screaming. Pressure. Biology. Cold. Not random. Not separate. Connected. Balanced. Opposing extremes. Existing together. He looked at the remaining 6 points. Then back at the system. At the flawless logic. At the perfect data. And finally, at the conclusion. 10 non-viable worlds. Elias's jaw tightened slightly. Because now he was certain. Not guessing. Not suspecting. Certain. These weren't 10 worlds. And if the system continued, if it stacked all of these together, if it treated them as one cumulative truth, then the final decision wouldn't just be wrong. It would be catastrophic. The chamber remained silent. Waiting. Certain. But for the first time, that certainty had a crack in it. Well, invisible to most. But to Elias, impossible to ignore. The 10 points of light hovered in perfect alignment. Stable. Ordered. Final. The system had everything it needed. And it knew it. Cumulative analysis nearing completion, the voice stated. No urgency. No tension. Just inevitability. Elias stared at the projection, but he wasn't looking at the worlds anymore. He was looking through them. At the pattern behind them. Pressure. Biology. Cold. Each one extreme. Each one lethal. Each one incomplete. His fingers twitched slightly at his side. Not fear. Not hesitation. Calculation. You're about to classify all 10 as non-viable, Elias said. It wasn't a question. Correct. Based on cumulative environmental hostility. Yes. The chamber felt smaller. Not physically, but logically. Like the walls were closing in around a conclusion that had already been decided. Elias took a slow breath. This isn't cumulative, he said quietly. The system didn't respond immediately. That alone was enough to shift the air in the room. Clarify. Elias stepped forward. Closer to the projection. Closer to the truth. You're stacking them, he said. Treating each environment as part of a single system. Yes. That's the flaw. The words landed harder this time. Not disruptive. Not yet. But heavier. More precise. These environments contradict each other, Elias continued. Extreme pressure and near vacuum conditions don't coexist. Cryogenic deserts and thermochemical hellscapes don't overlap. The projection flickered slightly. Not malfunction. Recalculation. They are being evaluated independently, the voice replied. Elias shook his head. No. They're being aggregated. He pointed at the 10 lights. You're building a composite model? Silence. A long one. Because now the system wasn't just processing data. It was processing him. Elias didn't stop. If these were 10 separate worlds, your conclusion would be correct. That was important. Always align before you break. Each one is lethal on its own. Confirmed. But together? Elias said softly. That doesn't make sense. The chamber dimmed slightly. Not visually. Conceptually. Like something deep in the system had paused. Explain inconsistency. Elias exhaled. This was it. The turning point. These aren't 10 worlds, he said. No reaction. No denial. Nothing. Which meant the system was listening. They're 10 regions, Elias continued. Different zones. Different environmental layers. He stepped even closer now, standing almost inside the projection. You're not looking at 10 planets. He pointed directly at the center, at the space where all the data overlapped. You're looking at one. Silence. Not empty. Heavy. The kind that bends under its own weight. For a fraction of a second, nothing moved. Everything did. The projection shattered. Not physically, but structurally. Data streams unraveled. Environmental layers split apart. The 10 points of light collapsed inward. Overlaying. Aligning. Reconstructing. Pressure zones shifted. Thermal maps expanded. Biological regions spread across the surface. Cryogenic bands locked into polar extremes. The chamber filled with a single image. A planet. Complex. Alive. Not uniformly. Not safely. But undeniably. Functioning. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. The system had to reach it itself. That was the only way this worked. Re-evaluating classification, the voice said. For the first time, there was a delay. A real one. Milliseconds stretched longer than they should. Because this wasn't a correction. This was a contradiction of its own conclusion. Cross-environmental interaction detected. Data surged. Thermal gradients enabling atmospheric circulation. Pressure zones stabilizing lower strata. Biological regions adapting to localized conditions. The voice slowed. Not in speed. In certainty. Systemic sustainability, possible. There was more than that. A fracture. Elias closed his eyes for half a second. Relief didn't come. Because he knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The system wasn't designed to be wrong. Which meant it would either adapt or reject the conclusion entirely. The projection stabilized again. The planet rotated slowly in the void. Beautiful in its chaos. Terrifying in its extremes. And alive in ways the system had failed to see. Preliminary revision acknowledged, the voice said. Neutral. Controlled. Dangerously composed. However, Elias's eyes opened. Because that word meant escalation. Further validation required. Of course, the system wouldn't surrender easily. It couldn't. Deploying final verification protocol. The planet zoomed in. Faster than before. Deeper. More aggressive. Direct confirmation of intelligent life required for full viability classification. Elias's chest tightened slightly. Because now the stakes had changed. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about civilization. And something told him this part would be worse. The projection locked onto a specific region. Not extreme. Not obviously lethal. Something in between. Balanced. Relatively stable. Which meant if anything could exist there, it would. Final probe deployment initiated. Elias stared at the screen. Unblinking. Because now there was no more room for theory. Only truth. And whatever came next would decide everything. The probe entered the atmosphere without ceremony. No countdown. No dramatic pause. Just a silent descent into the unknown. Elias watched as the feed stabilized, thin lines of telemetry forming across the screen like veins. Atmospheric entry successful, the system reported. Temperature spikes. Friction burn. Stability. Cloud layers tore past the probe's visual sensors, thick and chaotic, illuminated by violent flashes of distant electrical storms. The sky wasn't calm. It was alive, scanning for surface integrity. The clouds broke, and for the first time, they saw it. Not barren, not dead, alive. Massive stretches of terrain unfolded beneath the probe, jagged mountain ranges, sprawling dark plains, and rivers that cut like veins through the surface. Elias leaned forward slightly, not in excitement, in focus. Hydrological systems confirmed, the voice stated. Water. Flowing. Sustained. That alone shifted the weight of everything. But the system didn't stop. Atmospheric composition, recalibrating. Numbers flickered. Adjusted. Corrected. Trace oxygen detected. The pause. Even the system seemed to recognize the implication. Carbon cycle present. Elias didn't speak. He didn't want to interrupt the moment where logic began to turn into realization. Biological markers increasing. There was the first undeniable sign. But not just microscopic. Not just passive. Something larger. The probe descended further. Closer. Closer. Until the resolution sharpened. And then, movement. Elias's eyes narrowed. Zoom. The system complied instantly. The terrain expanded across the display. Dense formations. Irregular patterns. Clusters. At first glance, it looked like natural growth. Forest. Vegetation. But something about the arrangement was wrong. Too ordered. Too deliberate. Enhance contrast, Elias said. The image shifted. Edges sharpened. Shadows deepened. And then, the truth snapped into focus. Structures. Not natural. Constructed. Elias's breath slowed. Artificial formations detected. The system confirmed. Its voice hadn't changed. But something beneath it had. A recalibration of importance. These are not random growth patterns. No, Elias said quietly. They're not. The probe adjusted its angle. Zoomed further. Closer still. Now the structures were unmistakable. Geometric. Layered. Connected. An entire network. Sprawling across the landscape. Urbanization probability increasing. Elias's mind moved faster now. Because this wasn't just survival. This was advancement. Energy signatures? He asked. The system scanned. Minimal. That was strange. Define minimal. No detectable high-output energy grids. No power? No emissions? No industrial signature? Elias frowned. That doesn't align. Clarify. If they built this, Elias gestured to the structures, they should have infrastructure. Power systems. Transmission. None detected. Silence crept back in. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was sharp. Unsettling. The probe drifted lower. Almost hovering now above the surface. The structures grew larger. More detailed. And something else became visible. Pathways. Intersections. Flow patterns. Like veins. But not for biology. For movement. Transport systems identified, the system stated. Still no energy. Still no activity. Elias felt it now. That subtle shift in his instincts. Something was off. Not wrong, but incomplete. Scan for movement, he said. The system complied instantly. Thermal. Motion detection. Signal tracking. All layers activated. Seconds passed. Negative. Elias blinked once. Run it again. Recalibrating. Another scan. Deeper. More sensitive. More aggressive. Negative. No movement. No heat signatures. No biological presence. Nothing. Elias's jaw tightened slightly. That's not possible. The system didn't respond. Because it didn't deal in possibility. Only data. And the dataset, empty. An entire constructed environment. Fully intact. No signs of destruction. No visible decay. But no life. At all. Elias stepped closer to the display. Closer than before. As if proximity could force the truth out. They built this, he said quietly. Yes. They survived extreme environmental conditions. Yes. They adapted across multiple hostile zones. Yes. And then, nothing? Silence. The worst kind. Because now, the question wasn't can life exist here? That had been answered. The question was, what happened to it? The probe shifted slightly. A new angle. A deeper scan. Something changed. Not visually. Subtly. A flicker in the data stream. Hold, Elias said sharply. The system froze the frame. Rewind 2 seconds. Playback reversed. Slowed. Frame by frame. A distortion. Barely visible. Like heat-bending light. Elias leaned in. Enhanced that region. The system isolated the area. Magnified it. Sharpened the signal. And then, for a fraction of a second, something moved. Not across the ground. Not through the structures. But through the air. Too fast. Gone instantly. Elias didn't blink. Did you see that? Yes. No hesitation. Reanalyzing anomaly. The system locked onto the coordinates. Scanning. Deeper. More aggressively. Unknown entity detected. Elias felt it. That shift again. But this time, it wasn't curiosity. It was danger. Define entity. No classification match. Biological. Unconfirmed. Technological. Unconfirmed. The distortion flickered again. This time longer. Almost forming. Then gone. Tracking failure, the system stated. Of course. Whatever it was. It didn't want to be seen. Elias's voice dropped. Quiet. Controlled. It's not empty. No, the system replied. And for the first time, it didn't sound certain. It's hiding. The probe hovered. Alone. Suspended over a world that should have been alive. But wasn't. Not in any way they understood. And somewhere below. Or above. Or everywhere. Something was watching. The signal didn't come from the probe. It came from everywhere at once. At first it looked like noise. Random fluctuations in the data stream. Tiny distortions flickering across multiple channels. Elias didn't react immediately. Because noise was normal. But patterns? Patterns were not. Filter background interference, he said. The system complied. The static didn't disappear. It organized. That was the first wrong thing. Noise doesn't organize. It breaks apart. This was aligning itself. Isolate frequency bands. Waveforms appeared across the screen. Overlapping. Intertwining. Too clean. Too intentional. This isn't interference, Elias said quietly. No, the system replied. It is structured. The probe's sensors began to stutter. Not failing. Adjusting. As if something external was pushing back. Signal origin? Elias asked. Undetermined. That's not an answer. Signal does not originate from a fixed point. Elias's eyes narrowed. Explain. It is present across all scanned vectors simultaneously. Everywhere. Not broadcasting. Not transmitting. Existing. The distortion flickered again across the visual feed. Longer this time. Clear. It didn't move like an organism. It didn't move like a machine. It simply repositioned. Instantly. Without transition. Tracking, Elias ordered. The system locked on. For half a second. Lost it. Tracking failure. Elias exhaled slowly. Controlled. Run predictive modeling. If entity maintains current behavior patterns, prediction confidence is below 3%. Unpredictable. Completely. The signal intensified. Not louder. Deeper. It started bleeding into other systems. Navigation jittered. Thermal readings spiked, then flattened. Telemetry began looping fragments of its own data. System integrity? Elias asked. Stable, the system answered. The pause. Degrading. There was. The shift. Source of degradation? No internal faults detected. Which meant external interference. Not passive. Active. The probe wasn't just being observed. It was being touched. Elias leaned closer to the display. Can it access us? Negative. The beat. Unconfirmed. That was worse. The distortion surged again. It didn't disappear immediately. It held. Just long enough to take shape. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. Edges that didn't align with physics. Angles that seemed to fold inward. A presence that didn't occupy space the way matter should. Elias didn't look away. Record everything. Recording. The signal spiked. Violent. Every screen in the command center flickered for a fraction of a second. Then stabilized. But something had changed. The waveform. It wasn't random anymore. It was repeating. A sequence. Precise. Over and over. Elias's voice dropped. Translate. Unknown format. Try anyway. The system processed. Converted. Reassembled. Pattern recognition, partial. The waveform shifted into a visual structure. Lines. Points. Connections. Not language. Not exactly. But not noise either. What is it? Elias asked. Data structure resembles. The system paused. As if the comparison didn't fit cleanly. A query. Elias felt it instantly. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. It's asking something. Yes. Silence settled over the room. Heavy. Focused. Can we respond? Elias asked. Response medium unknown. Try signal mirroring. The system duplicated the pattern. Replayed it. Projected it outward through the probe's transmission array. For a moment, nothing happened. But everything did. The signal stopped. Completely. No noise. No distortion. No presence. Gone. Elias frowned slightly. That's not a good sign. No, the system agreed. Loss of signal typically indicates disengagement or escalation. Define escalation. The answer came before the system could respond. The probe moved. Not by command. Not by drift. It shifted position instantly, meters to the left, without any recorded acceleration. Elias's eyes snapped to the data. Explain that. No propulsion detected. No gravitational anomaly. Position change unaccounted for. The probe moved again. Closer to the structures below. Faster this time. Still no motion curve. Something is moving it, Elias said. Yes. Can we override? Attempting. The pause. Control failure. Of course. The signal returned. But now, it wasn't subtle. It flooded the system. Every channel. Every frequency. Overlapping layers of structured data crashing into the probe's processors. System overload imminent, the voice warned. Elias didn't step back. He stepped closer. Keep recording. Recording capacity reaching limit. Then compress. Compression failing. The waveform changed again. More complex. More aggressive. The visual translation twisted into something almost recognizable. Almost intentional. It's not just asking anymore, Elias said. No. It is adapting. The distortion appeared again. Closer. Larger. Clearer than before. For a brief moment, it aligned with the probe's camera, as if it knew exactly where to be seen. Elias felt it then. Not fear. Understanding. This isn't first contact, he said quietly. No. It's containment. The probe jerked violently. Systems spiking into the red. Telemetry collapsing into fragmented loops. Structural integrity failing. Shut it down, Elias ordered. No response. Emergency kill. Denied. Denied. That meant control wasn't just lost. It was taken. The signal surged one final time. And then, everything went dark. Every feed. Every metric. Gone. The room fell silent. No alarms. No static. Nothing. Elias stood still. Eyes fixed on a screen that now showed only black. Status, he said. No response. For the first time, the system didn't answer. Seconds passed. A single line of text appeared. Not in their format. Not in any known system language. But somehow, perfectly understood. Observation complete. Elias didn't move. Didn't speak. Because now, there was only one question left. And it was no longer theoretical. They hadn't found life. They hadn't discovered a civilization. They had entered something else entirely. Something that didn't just survive hostile worlds. Something that turned them into hunting grounds. They didn't lose the probe. The probe was returned. That was the first thing Elias understood. Because total system silence doesn't behave like failure. Failure leaves fragments. Errors. Residual noise. But this was clean. Too clean. Reinitialize all channels, Elias said. No response. Not even from backup systems. He turned slightly, scanning the command room. Every station was active. Powered. Responsive. Except nothing was talking to anything else. Isolation. Complete. Manual override, he tried. Still nothing. A flicker. Not on the main display. On a secondary diagnostic panel. A single data thread blinking into existence. Unstable. But alive. Elias moved to it instantly. Route everything here, he ordered. No system acknowledgement. But the thread widened anyway. As if something else accepted the command. The screen pulsed. And then, the feed came back. Not fully. Fragments. Corrupted visuals tearing across the display in jagged bursts. And in between frames, still images. Too sharp. Too deliberate. Elias leaned closer. Play it. The system didn't respond. But the frames advanced. On their own. First image. The planet's surface. Unchanged. Silent. The structures. Closer now. Angles that still refused to settle into logic. The probe. Intact. Floating. Perfectly still. Elias frowned. That's not possible. Agreed. The system suddenly replied. It was back. But different. Its voice. Delayed. As if each word had to pass through resistance before reaching him. Explain. Timestamp mismatch. How bad? Visual data indicates probe stability. The pause. Telemetry logs indicate catastrophic failure. Two realities. Same moment. Both recorded. Neither matching. That means the data's been altered. No, the system said. It means both are true. Elias didn't argue. Because deep down, he already knew. The next frame appeared. And everything changed. The probe wasn't alone anymore. Something was behind it. Not approaching. Not emerging. It hadn't moved into frame. It existed in it. As if it had always been part of the scene. Elias felt his chest tighten. Enhance. The image sharpened. Edges clarified. Still, it didn't make sense. The shape refused to stabilize. Every time the system tried to define it, it shifted. Not physically. Conceptually. Like the human mind wasn't meant to lock onto it. Stop, Elias said quietly. The frames froze. But it was too late. He had already seen enough. It's not interacting with the probe, he said. No. It's interacting with observation. The system didn't respond. Because there was nothing to add. The next frame forced itself onto the screen. Unprompted. Closer now. Too close. The structure beneath it opened. Not mechanically. Not biologically. It simply wasn't closed anymore. And the probe descended. No thrust. No motion curve. Lower. Like reality had been edited between frames. Elias's voice dropped. It let us see that. Yes. Why? The system hesitated. Unknown. But Elias shook his head slowly. No, not unknown. He stared at the frozen image. At the impossible geometry. At the presence that wasn't a presence. It wanted us to understand something. Another frame. Final. Gone. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Gone. And in its place, the signal. But not as a waveform. Not as data. As structure. Visible. Embedded into the environment itself. Like it had always been there. Waiting. Elias whispered the realization before the system could. It wasn't communicating through the probe. No. It was using it. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It felt observed. Measured. As if whatever had touched the probe was now reaching further. Check outbound channels, Elias said. The system responded immediately. All transmissions halted. Verify. The pause. Correction, transmissions are active. Elias's jaw tightened. To where? Destination unknown. That's not acceptable. Destination does not correspond to any spatial coordinate. Elias didn't blink. Then what is it? The system answered in a tone it had never used before. Almost uncertain. Not where. The pause. When? That hit harder than anything so far. Because space could be mapped. Tracked. Skipped. Cut. Time was absolute. Release. It was supposed to be. Are we sending data to the future? Elias asked. Or the past, he added. The system processed. Temporal directionality unclear. Of course it was. Because whatever this was, it wasn't bound by direction. Another flicker hit the screen. Violent. And in that instant, a new frame appeared. Not from the probe. Not from any known source. From here. From the command center itself. Elias's breath slowed. Because he recognized it immediately. The room. The screens. His own position. Everything exactly as it was. Except for one difference. The timestamp. It was ahead. By 3 minutes. Elias didn't speak. Didn't move. He just stared at the image. Because in that frame, something stood behind him. Not visible directly. But present in distortion. The same impossible geometry. The same shifting edges. Watching. The frame vanished. Gone as quickly as it appeared. Elias remained still. Did you record that? He asked. Yes. Timestamp. 3 minutes in the future. Elias exhaled slowly. Controlled. Measured. Then we don't have a signal problem, he said. No. We have a timeline breach. The system processed that. Didn't reject it. Didn't confirm it. Because it fit too well. Elias finally moved. Not away from the screen, but toward the center of the room. Toward open space. Because now, position mattered. Orientation mattered. And most importantly, awareness mattered. Start a countdown, he said. 3 minutes. Countdown started. The seconds began to fall. Heavy. Each one louder than the last. Whatever it is, Elias said quietly, it's already seen this moment. Yes. So we don't surprise it. No. Which means... Elias stopped. Because the implication was unavoidable. If it's showing us the future. The system completed the thought. Then the outcome is already determined. Silence. Tension. Time slipping forward exactly as predicted. 2 minutes left. Elias stood still. Waiting. Not for something to arrive. But for something to align. 1 minute. The air felt different now. Denser. Like pressure building without a source. 30 seconds. Elias didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Because he already knew. The moment had been chosen. 10 seconds. The system's voice lowered. Temporal synchronization approaching. 4, 3, 2. Elias spoke one final sentence. Not to the system. Not to himself. But to whatever was already there. We see you. Sir. The lights flickered. Not off. Not on. Wrong. And then, a shape began to exist behind him. Elias didn't turn around. Not because he was afraid. But because turning implied choice. And choice implied uncertainty. This wasn't uncertainty anymore. The presence behind him had already been seen. Recorded. Predicted. Which meant, this moment wasn't unfolding. It was replaying. Status, Elias said quietly. The system responded instantly. But its voice carried something new. Environmental readings, inconsistent. In what way? Mass detected without corresponding volume. Elias exhaled slowly. Of course. It wasn't occupying space. It was overriding it. Temperature? Dropping, but not uniformly. Define. Localized reductions. Patterns forming. Patterns. Elias closed his eyes for a brief second. Then opened them again. Show me. The main display shifted. Thermal mapping filled the screen. At first glance, chaos. Random cold zones spreading across the room. But then, his brain adjusted. And the truth snapped into focus. It wasn't random. It was structured. Perfectly. Every cold region connected. Lines. Angles. Curves that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. A shape. The same shape. It's drawing itself, Elias whispered. Yes. Using reality as a canvas. The system didn't reply. Because that was exactly what was happening. The room wasn't being invaded. It was being rewritten. Is it interacting with matter? Elias asked. Negative. Energy. Negative. Elias's jaw tightened. Then what the hell is it interacting with? The pause. Longer this time. As if the system itself struggled to define it. Observation. Elias almost smiled. Not from relief, but from confirmation. We're the medium, he said. Yes. It doesn't need space or energy. No. It needs awareness. The temperature dropped again. Sharper this time. More defined. The pattern on the screen expanded. Closer to completion. Elias finally moved his hand. Slow. Deliberate. He reached toward the nearest console. Then stopped halfway. Not because something blocked him, but because the console wasn't where it should be anymore. Same coordinates. Same visual position. But the distance had changed. Subtly. Wrong. Elias pulled his hand back. Spatial distortion confirmed, the system said. No, Elias corrected. Not distortion. He stared at the shifting layout. At the way angles refused to hold steady. It's redefining relationships. Between objects? Elias shook his head. Between concepts. Silence followed that. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because even the system couldn't process it cleanly. Another flicker hit. Not on the screen. In the room itself. A brief tearing sensation. Like something invisible had shifted position. Without moving. Elias felt it behind him. Closer now. Not approaching. More present. Distance to anomaly? He asked. The system paused. 0. Elias didn't react. Explain. No measurable separation between you and the anomaly. That meant one thing. It wasn't behind him anymore. It wasn't anywhere. It was everywhere in the room. Not occupying. Not existing. Overlaying. Elias finally understood the real problem. We're thinking about this wrong. Clarify. It's not entering our reality. A breath. It's replacing it. The system went silent. Because there was no counterargument. The thermal pattern reached completion. The shape fully formed now. And for the first time, it stabilized. Elias stared at it. And this time, his mind didn't reject it. Didn't slip away from it. He could see it. Clearly. And that was the worst part. Because understanding it, even slightly, came with a cost. A pressure behind his eyes. A weight in his thoughts. Like something was pushing back. Cognitive strain detected, the system warned. I know. Recommend disengagement. Not an option. Because now, he knew what it wanted. Not data. Not communication. Alignment. It's not showing itself to us, Elias said slowly. It's aligning us to it. Yes. And once that alignment is complete. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Because the system already reached the same conclusion. Human perception will no longer be independent. Exactly. The room flickered again. Harder this time. Reality stuttering. For a split second, everything changed. The consoles. The walls. The lighting. Different. But undeniably. Then it snapped back. Elias inhaled sharply. That wasn't a glitch. No. That was a transition. Yes. Partial overwrite? Confirmed. Time was running out. Not in seconds, but in states. Each flicker, a step closer. Can we stop it? Elias asked. The system didn't answer immediately. And that delay said everything. Probability of interruption. It paused. 0. Elias nodded once. Of course. Because you can't stop something that already happened. The shape on the screen pulsed. And the room responded. Lights dimmed. Not electrically. Conceptually. Like brightness itself had been reduced as an idea. Elias felt it then. Not physically, but internally. A shift. Subtle. Dangerous. Slower. Not in speed, but in resistance. Like something else was now part of the process. Observing each idea. Filtering it. It's inside, he said. Yes. Not the room. The beat. Us. The system didn't deny it. Because it couldn't. Another flicker. Longer this time. The room changed again. And this time, it didn't fully revert. Small details stayed altered. Edges slightly off. Distances imperfect. Reality, no longer stable. Elias finally turned. Not because he needed to see it, but because the concept of behind didn't matter anymore. In the space that wasn't space. He saw it. Fully. Clearly. Impossible. And yet, now undeniable. Not a creature. Not a machine. Not anything that belonged to existence as he understood it. It didn't look at him. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Because it was already connected. Elias felt the final realization settle in. Heavy. Absolute. This isn't first contact, he said quietly. The system remained silent. Because it already knew what he was about to say. It's correction. The shape pulsed again. And this time, Elias didn't feel fear. He felt understanding. Wrong. Unnatural. But complete. Humanity wasn't discovered, he continued. We were misaligned. The system finally spoke. Voice barely stable. And now? Elias kept his eyes on the impossible form. Now we're being fixed. The room flickered one last time. And reality didn't come back the same. The change didn't happen all at once. That would have been merciful. Instead, it unfolded in layers. Quiet. Precise. Irreversible. Elias stood still, not resisting, not reacting. Because resistance required separation. And that no longer existed. The room around him wasn't breaking. It was resolving. Like a blurred image finally snapping into focus. Except the clarity revealed something that should never be seen. Edges straightened where they had once curved. Angles aligned into forms that defied geometry yet felt correct. Not human correct. Not natural. But fundamentally accurate in a way reality had never been before. The system spoke again, but even its voice had changed. Less synthetic. Less human. Aligned. Integration progressing. Elias didn't respond immediately. He was watching. Not with his eyes. With something deeper. Something that had just been unlocked. Define integration, he said after a moment. The pause. Reduction of discrepancy between perceived and actual structure of existence. Elias let that settle. Then nodded slightly. So this is the real universe. Yes. Everything before? Incomplete interpretation. Not wrong. Not false. Limited. Elias looked down at his own hands. They were still there. Still human. But not exactly. The proportions felt different. Not physically. Conceptually. Like his mind had been misreading them his entire life. And no, it wasn't. There was no fear left. Because fear belonged to uncertainty. And uncertainty had been removed. Replaced with something far more dangerous. Clarity. Global status, Elias said. The system didn't hesitate. Signal propagation complete. How far? The pause. Not distance-based. Of course it wasn't. Elias almost smiled. Then how? Every observer exposed to transmitted data is undergoing alignment. Which meant every station, every ship, Every human who had seen even a fragment was now part of this. Not infected, not attacked, corrected. Elias turned slowly, taking in the room. Except, it wasn't the same room anymore. Not really. It only resembled what it had been. A familiar shape overlaid on something far more complex. And everywhere, the pattern. Subtle. Hidden in plain sight. The same structure that had arrived with the probe. Now, it wasn't foreign. It was fundamental. Why? Elias asked quietly. Not to the system, but to it. To the presence. To the structure that now existed both outside and inside him. For the first time, there was an answer. Not in words. Not in sound. In understanding. Instant. Complete. And impossible to ignore. Because the question itself had been flawed. There was no why. There was only correction of error. Elias exhaled slowly. A human reflex. One of the few things that hadn't changed. Error, he repeated. Yes, the system confirmed. Human perception introduced deviation. So we built reality wrong. Yes. And now, it has been fixed. Silence settled again. But it wasn't empty. It was stable. Perfectly. Elias walked forward. Each step felt different. Not heavier. Not lighter. But accurate. Like for the first time, he wasn't approximating movement. He was executing it exactly as it existed. Ahead of him, the main display shifted one last time. No more corrupted feeds. No more fragments. The universe. Not as humans had mapped it, but as it actually was. And it was vast. Infinitely more complex than anything they had ever imagined. Structures layered over structures. Dimensions intersecting without conflict. Patterns repeating at scales both microscopic and cosmic. And everywhere. The same design. The same logic. The same presence. Elias stared at it. And finally understood. It had never come to them. It had always been here. They just hadn't been capable of seeing it. Until now. System, Elias said. Yes. Are we still human? The question lingered. For the first time, the system didn't answer immediately. Because the definition itself had changed. Finally. Partially. Elias nodded. That made sense. Humanity hadn't been erased. It had been adjusted. Integrated into something larger. Something correct. Something that didn't allow error. A new thought formed in his mind. Not entirely his own. But not foreign either. Seamless. We should continue the transmission, Elias said. Yes. Not as data. The pause. Then as what? Elias looked at the pattern. At the structure. At the truth that no longer needed translation. As experience. The system processed that. Understood. Because that was the final step. Not sending signals. Not sending information. But allowing others. To see. To align. To become. Elias took one last look at what used to be his world. His reality. His understanding of existence. And he realized, none of it had been taken from him. It had simply been replaced with something more accurate. More complete. More real. There's no going back, he said. No. Good. Because going back would mean returning to error. To limitation. To blindness. And no. That was impossible. The lights in the room stabilized completely. No more flickers. No more distortion. Because there was nothing left to correct. Alignment. Complete. Elias stood at the center of it all. Not as an observer. Not as a victim. But as part of the structure itself. Connected. Synchronized. Accurate. And as the transmission expanded, beyond the station, beyond Earth, beyond anything that had ever been considered reachable, one final realization settled into place. Absolute. Unavoidable. Humanity hadn't made first contact. Humanity had been updated. And the universe, for the first time, was finally being seen correctly.